Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you very much for joining today's program. We will start the recitation. We'll start the program with a recitation of Quran, followed by a short marshia. Let's start with Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والفجر وليال عشر والشفع والوتر والليل إذا يسر هل في ذلك قسم لذي حجر والفجر وليال عشر والشفع والوتر والليل إذا يسر هل في ذلك قسم لذي حجر ألم تر كيف فعل ربك بعاد إرم ذات العماد التي لم يخلق مثلها في البلاد وثمود الذين جابوا الصخر بالواد وفرعون ذي الأوتاد الذين طغوا في البلاد وفرعون ذي الأوتاد الذين طغوا في البلاد فأكثروا فيها الفساد فصب عليهم ربك سوط عذاب إن ربك لبالمرصاد فأما الإنسان إذا ما ابتلاه ربه فأكرمه ونعمه فيقول ربي أكرمن وأما إذا ما ابتلاه فقدر عليه رزقه فيقول ربي أهانن كلا بل لا تكرمون اليتيم ولا تحاضون على طعام المسكين كلا بل لا تكرمون اليتيم ولا تحاضون على طعام المسكين وتأكلون التراث أكلا لما وتحبون المال حبا جما كلا إذا دكت الأرض دكا دكا وجاء ربك والملك صفا صفا وجيء يومئذ بجهنم يومئذ يتذكر الإنسان وأنى له الذكرى يومئذ يتذكر الإنسان وأنى له الذكرى يقول يا ليتني قدمت لحياتي يقول يا ليتني قدمت لحياتي يومئذ يتذكر الإنسان وأنى له الذكرى يقول يا ليتني قدمت لحياتي فيومئذ لا يعذب عذابه أحد ولا يوثق وثاقه أحد يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي صدق الله العلي العظيم.
بازار شام ہے، بازار شام ہے، بازار شام ہے، بازار شام ہے، مظلوم کا کنبہ جب شام کو پہنچا، عابد کا تھا نوحہ لو آ گیا بازار، میری پھوپھی اماں روتی ہے بے پردہ، لاکھوں کا ہے مجمع لو آ گیا بازار، یہ سوچ کے روتا ہوں ماں بہنیں کھلے سے ہے، کس طرح سے دیکھوں گا جو سامنے منظر ہے، نیزے پہ ہے ایک سے روتا ہے جو اکثر، کرتا ہے جو نوحہ لو آ گیا بازار، مظلوم کا کنبہ جب شام کو پہنچا، عابد کا تھا نوحہ لو آ گیا بازار، بازو ہے بندے میرے میں کچھ نہیں کر سکتا، بوچار ہے پتھر کی ہم سب ہے رسن بستا، ہے خون کا دریا جو سر سے ہے بہتا، ہنستے ہیں یہ آدھا لو آ گیا بازار، مظلوم کا کنبہ جب شام کو پہنچا، عابد کا تھا نوحہ لو آ گیا بازار، موت آئے گی زندہ میں پیاری میری بہنا کی، ہاتھوں سے بناؤں گا میں قبر سکینہ کی، وہ خوں برا کرتا ہر ایک تماشا، یہ اس کو ہے سہنا لو آ گیا بازار، مظلوم کا کنبہ جب شام کو پہنچا، عابد کا تھا نوحہ लो आ गया बाजार। मौला को मदीना में एक शख्स ने जब पूछा, जो सबसे मुसीबत थी वो कौन सा मंजर था। मौला कहे रोके, दिल सोज था मंजर, नजरों में जो छाया, लो आ गया बाजार। मजलूम का खुनबा जब शाम को पहुंचा, आबिद का था नौहा, लो आ गया बाजार, लो आ गया बाजार। सल्लु अला मुहम्मद व आलि मुहम्मद। अल्लाहुम्मा सल्लि अला मुहम्मद व आलि मुहम्मद।
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Thank you very much for the Quran recitation and the Marshal recitation just now. Today, the way that we're going to do the program is we have the talk by Shaykh Jaffer Ladak, followed by a Marshal Matam, and then after which we'll end with a Q&A. So first, let's start with the talk by Shaykh Jaffer Ladak. Shaykh Jaffer is the resident Aalim of Hujjat, Stanmore, and prior to his Islamic studies, he was a partner in the DRC group, supplying locum to the NHS. He studied in Kerbala under Ayatollah al Modarresi and at the Al-Mahdi Institute, and he's written 4 books and holds a master's in Islamic law. We look forward to hearing his talk tonight, and let's welcome him. Salat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. My thanks goes out to the organizers and to the community for once again inviting me, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all of your efforts in the way of reviving the movement of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam in these days. Let us begin with the recitation of Surah al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وقوله الحق. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء من القول إلا من ظلم وكان الله سميعا عليما. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected teachers, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. عظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا أبي عبد الله الحسين صلوات الله وسلامه عليه. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all tawfiq to be able to visit the shrine of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, to stand underneath his qubbah, and for us to once again soon gather together as community and friends, inshallah. Amongst the famous personalities of the event of Kerbala is Her Eminence Lady Kulthum, Salamullahi alayha, who is the second daughter of Imam Ali alayhi salam and Lady Fatima al-Zahra, Salamullahi alayha. As you know, these two great personalities had 4 children. Imam al-Hassan, Imam al-Hussein, Zainab al-Kubra, and Zainab al-Sughra, known as Kulthum, salamullahi alayhim ajma'een. In a night like tonight, in a day like tomorrow, and especially over the course of this period, we hear so much about Lady Kulthum, but often it is in passing. Very rarely do we take time to be able to assess her life to the same extent or with the same significance that we try to be able to reflect on the movement of her elder sister, Lady Zainab alayha salam. And there are a number of reasons for this. Comparatively, she is a much lesser known sibling, and the reasons for this are both historical as well as cultural. And what I wish to be able to do tonight, inshallah, is to be able to look through some of the events that are particular to her according to the various maqatil that have been collected over the time, and try to reintroduce us to the personality of Lady Kulthum alayha salam in order to be able to appreciate her role and contribution in the history and the development of the events around Kerbala and after Kerbala up until the Arbaeen and the return back to the city of Medina al-Munawwara. As I mentioned a minute ago, there are both historical reasons and cultural reasons as to why Lady Kulthum alayha salam is a lesser known personality compared to her elder sister Zainab al-Kubra, salamullahi alayhim ajma'een. Amongst the historical reasons are that much of her life is actually a debate around her existence. According to our earliest sources, but also a wide range of sources, Sayyidah Kulthum alayha salam is an individual, unique personality born after Zainab al-Kubra, her elder sister. However, there is a plethora of Shia ulama of the most senior levels of historical study that do not believe that she existed, but rather that there was only one Zainab, and that these two personalities are actually the same one Zainab, the daughter of Imam Ali and Lady Fatima, salamullahi alayhim ajma'een. Now, I don't want to go too much into detail. In my humble opinion, she does exist, and there are enough of the earliest sources to suggest as such. To give you a flavor of some of them as an example, we have the book Kitab al-Irshad by Shaykh al-Mufid alayhi rahmah, who of course lived in the 4th century after Hijrah and compiled one of the earliest texts or surviving texts around the history of the A'imma alayhimus salam, in which she is clearly mentioned, differentiated, and her story is different to that of her elder sister. We also have the Maqtal of Abi Mikhnaf. Of course, the version that has reached us may not be the same as the original version that did not reach us. However, still, a great level of stock is placed into this text. And in the earliest maqatil that we have, such as the Maqtal of Abi Mikhnaf, which has reached us, Lady Kulthum alayha salam, differentiated from her sister Zainab alayha salam, is mentioned. And of course, the details of her sermons, the details of her statements, the poetries that she read out in response to the events are mentioned. So therefore, she is unique, both in terms of some of the historical works that have been collected, some of the maqatil works, which are specific to the event of Kerbala that have been collected. We also have a third source of literature, which are the sayings particular to the women of the history of Islam. And of course, this was a science in and of itself. As you know, there have been sciences dedicated to the study of women narrators in the chains of ahadith. And of course, especially as giant narrators such as, for example, Aisha, the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so many narrations go back to her. So many narrations will go back, for example, to the other great wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Certain works are dedicated towards collecting the statements, the contributions of the women of the early periods of Islam. Even in those works, Lady Kulthum alayhi salam is distinguished as an individual separate to her sister. Now, of course, if the majority of scholars doubt her existence and her presence in Kerbala, then as an outcome, a large movement over a period of time took place to kind of ignore, sideline this great lady and research and study about her, or for a sake of precaution, merge her story and narrative into that of her elder sister Zainab al-Kubra alayhi salam. This is the first reason. The second historical reason as to the doubt, or rather to the reasons as to why she is a lesser known personality, is because there is a number of texts in the school of Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam about her so-called marriage to the second caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab. Now, again, for the record, in my humble study, she did not marry Umar ibn al-Khattab. Rather, it was Kulthum, the daughter of Abu Bakr, the first caliph, that when Imam Ali alayhi salam married her mother, then allowed this Kulthum to be married to Umar ibn al-Khattab as per the wasiyah of Abu Bakr. But there has been a long ongoing debate about this issue. The problem has been, especially in the recent centuries, especially during the Safavid period until date, when there has been an existential outright rivalry with our Sunni brethren, what has happened is that the story of Sayyidah Kulthum alayhi salam has been focused on the so-called marriage to Umar ibn al-Khattab, and rather she has been overshadowed through the lens of sectarianism. And as an outcome, most people end up knowing about her story because of this particular debate. Ultimately, for whatever reasons, historically, she has been sidelined. In terms of our own community dynamic, we too have sidelined her compared to her older sister. And of course, the reasons for this has been because there has been so much effort to be able to revive the works of her elder sister, alayhi salam, there has been less. And this is no different to even some of the A'imma alayhim salam. Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam, comparatively, is very much less known. We end up hearing about one element or two elements of his life constantly. Whereas there is an encyclopedia of work dedicated to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And therefore it is not surprising that we have also sidelined Sayyidah Kulthum alayhi salam. And therefore it clearly requires us to put effort in to be able to revive her memory, to look at what history speaks about her, and particularly the lessons and contributions that we learn from her. In a famous story that is well circulated amongst the Hawzat, it is said that one day His Eminence Imam al-Khomeini alayhi rahmah, he spoke of a dream one day that he received, and that he in his dream saw Lady Kulthum alayhi salam, and she complained about how the community did not know of her legacy. And when Sayyid al-Khomeini alayhi rahmah spoke about this, there was much more of a fervor to become known about her. It is interesting as well that even in our textual sources, Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam appear to speak about Lady Kulthum alayhi salam herself. And what I mean to indicate here is that, of course, if we take an assumption that the narration is sound, in order for us to quote it, we have to make that assumption that it is sound, right? If we assume it is a sound narration from Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam to speak about Lady Kulthum, knowing that there might be a difference in opinion in history in the future, of course, the fact that they named her Kulthum and didn't speak about Zainab alayhi salam, of course, there are a number of assumptions in this, theological assumptions as well. But if this is the case, then what we find is Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam spoke about her in order to keep her legacy individual, alive, such that we were able to distinguish between these two personalities. There are many narrations. For example, Imam Jaffer Ladak, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh, narrates that his father, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh, said about Lady Kulthum, quote, she spoke to the people in the marketplaces of Kufa, in which all the people remained silent. When she gave a sermon so eloquently, it was as if Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam himself was speaking. If we assume that hadith to be correct, it gives us an indication as to the status and to the contribution of this great lady in the history of the movement of Kerbala. Actually, in the books of Maqatil, you will often hear that Lady Zainab al-Kubra, alayha salam, the elder sister, is given a title, and that is Ummul Masa'ib. She is the mother of the Masa'ib, of the tribulations, of the type of grief that they went through. All of the tragedies. She is the mother of that. And of course, this epithet is more than just a title. It gives us an indication as to the realities of what she underwent. However, again, in the books of Maqatil, the title of Sayyida Kulthum alayha salam is Nawaha. She is the mother of Noha. Why? As we will see in the second half of our discussion tonight, inshallah, she was a specialist in poetry. As you know, Nawaha would come from the root word of Noha. What we recite is the Noha, is the elegy, is the lamentation of the events of Kerbala. And we do so in a poetic form. Just now, after the beautiful recitation of Quran, we recited a Noha. After the Gham and the Masa'ib, we will listen to another Noha, and so on and so forth. Her title is Nawaha because she, according to these histories, was the one who started, this is so key to her life, started the poetries and the lamentations in a poetic form about the events of Kerbala and beyond. Think about that. Sayyida Kulthum alayhi salam is the one who started all of these elegies herself. And I'll recite some for you in a few minutes' time, inshallah, so that you get a picture of the types of poetries that she extemporaneously is said to have spoken at the tragedies of the body of her brother, upon the arrival into Kufa, upon the arrival into Damascus, upon the arrival even back to the city of Medina. In this way, she is distinguished from her elder sister, alayha salam. Her elder sister is known in the history for bearing the entire responsibility of the caravan on her shoulders, whilst Imam as-Sajjad alayhi salam was apparently incapacitated. And we also know that she spoke phenomenal sermons that would shake the foundation of those who were present in front of her. Zainab al-Kubra alayhi salam is known for this. Zainab al-Sughra, Kulthum alayhi salam, is known as Nawaha because she is the one who impressed upon people how to do the Noha, and she is the one who began that through her capacity to be able to recite the lines of poetry that she did. Salamullahi alayha. If this is the case, if this is sound and this is understood to be correct in our inherited culture, then all of the Noha that we recite today around the world, in any form, whether we describe it as the Latmiya, whether we recite it as the Ma'tam, if you think back of the chain of where it starts with this great lady, which means that her contribution to Kerbala is so profound that when we really think about how much we have missed out on her legacy, then we have truly missed out on something profound. Now, in the book, The Hidden Treasure, which is a biography and analysis of the life of Lady Kulthum alayhi salam, it is narrated by Shaykh Tustari that there is an event specific where Lady Kulthum alayhi salam is said to have saved imamate. The idea now is for us to be able to look at some of her contributions specifically, and I want to recite some of the lines of poetry so you get a glimpse of what she has contributed. But I also wish to be able to tell you about some of the events that are associated to her specifically, her name specifically, such that we are able to appreciate her contribution in the wider sense. Shaykh Tustari mentions a narration in his work that actually comes from Hashim Bahrani, Awalim Sayyid al-Nisa, volume 2, page 1014. He quotes as following: Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam sought help on the day of Ashura, and when Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam was determined to go to the battle, he took in his hand a staff and was leaning on it, and in the other hand took a sword, dragging it along the earth, and came out of the tent. Lady Kulthum went out behind him and called out, "O my son, return back." Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam responded, "O my aunt, leave me, so I should fight in the company of the son of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa alih." Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam said, "O Kulthum, take him back to the tent, so that the earth should not remain without the offspring of Muhammad," and so she took him back in. If this is correct, then she has made a huge contribution here in terms of protecting the lineage of Ahl al-Bayt alayhimus salam and ensuring that Imam is continuing to be present until the events would occur. This tells us some huge contribution of hers throughout the history. Another short example of something that is narrated to her is a famous set of lines of poetry that she is said to have recited immediately after the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And this particular narration is very interesting. It is actually mentioned in the Maqtal of Abi Mikhnaf. As I mentioned, the Maqtal of Abi Mikhnaf, there is some version maybe that has reached us, and this is mentioned and quoted by many of the senior scholars that have spoken about the event of Kerbala. What I mean to say here is that many of the scholars do give it credence in terms of the quality of the statement is an indication of its veracity. So there is the statement, or in the ahadith, that says that when Dhul Janah, the horse of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, was heard neighing, and maybe we could, in our own poetic sense, translate this to be screaming at the slaughter of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and what it has just witnessed, that the horse ran back towards the tents. When Lady Kulthum alayhi salam saw the horse without its blessed rider, salamullahi alayh, she began to weep and recited the following lines of poetry. This means, again, if this narration is sound from Abi Mikhnaf, this is the first line of poetry, first ever line of poetry to be recited about the killing of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam after his martyrdom. She says the following lines of poetry: "My calamity is so great, I cannot even explain it through poetry. I cannot begin to comprehend it through my knowledge and my thoughts. You approached the event and it has shocked me. I used to honor every neighbor, but today look at Hussein laid down on the earth. If it was not for my patience, which encompasses my thought, it is as if on every side of his body there is a person matching the grief of my thoughts. I had hoped for many beautiful things in this life, had it not been for this destiny which happened to him. Now Al-Jawad, meaning the horse, now Al-Jawad has returned. There is no welcome for his arrival except for seeking revenge for the sake of Hussein. It is not for the fault of Al-Jawad that Allah has made him miss his horse, but He has also protected him from harm. O my soul, be patient in this world and its trials. This is Hussein going up towards the Lord of the heavens. The Maqtal says that when the other ladies heard of this poem, they came out of the tents and they saw the blood-soaked horse. They began to slap their cheeks, tear at their dresses, and they shouted, Wa Muhammadah, Wa Aliyah, Wa Hasana, Wa Husayna. Today Muhammad al-Mustafa has died. Today Ali al-Murtada has died. Today Fatima al-Zahra has died. Then, again, according to this maqtal, Lady Kulthum leaned towards her sister Zainab. This is important because in this maqtal, it differentiates between the two people. This is an evidence of her existence. Lady Kulthum leans towards her sister Zainab and says, time has caused us to bear this calamity and torn into us with its teeth and with its claws. Time has sent us to a strange land, and it has forced us to that which we were afraid of. And time has surprised us about our own relations, and with its two hands, it has separated us from our strength. Time has caused my brother to enter into tragedy. The calamity has blinded us and engulfed us. Hussein, the land has become glittering, and how he became a shining glory before Allah. What has befallen me? If only the smallest of it was to befall on something else, it would complain to all of existence about this calamity. It is so sorrowful to me that we have had to leave without the personality of Hussein and to find him buried under the earth. Nothing has remained for me to seek protection with if time has defeated me. The hands of time have torn us whilst our grandfather, the messenger of Allah, the glorious grandfather, had left with the very best of conduct. These are examples of the poetries that are associated to Lady Kulthum alayhi salam, hence her being known as Nawaha. After the day of Ashura, the day after, as you know from the Maqtal, it is said that the women and children, the Sabaya, the captives, are taken out, are taken out of the lands of Kerbala and heading towards the various towns and cities to be paraded. The narration says that the Sabaya were made to mount camels without saddles, specifically. And it is said in the books of Maqtal that this was particularly a form of torture, or a form of what's the word I wish to be able to use here? It's a form of degrading the prisoners of war. And particularly the books of Maqtal state that this wasn't an Arab tradition originally, that this was a Turk and Roman tradition of how they treated prisoners of war, and that the army of Umar ibn Sa'ad decided to take up this in order to degrade the women and children of Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam. As the children were being put onto the camels, it is said that the men of the army of Umar ibn Sa'ad also wanted to assist the ladies up onto the camels, which of course would be something against their hurma and something that would not be allowing to do that, to touch them and to place them onto the camels. According to the narration, Lady Kulthum alayhi salam was amongst these ladies, and she said, how can they take us on top of the camel whilst we are the flowers of the messenger? Tell them to stay away, and we will place one another on top of the camels, which indicates through the meaning of the text that they were going to actually lift the ladies themselves up onto the camels. So now what I wish to be able to do is to move towards the events of Kufa and to tell you about what occurred in Kufa when the Sabaya were brought there. There are a number of narrations that are attributed to Lady Kulthum alayhi salam. I'll just read a couple out briefly for you to get a glimpse of what she is said to have said. Now, this particular narration is attributed to Abdullah ibn Abbas, which is interesting for us to be able to understand how he might have heard this. But in any case, we will mention the narration that is said about it. When the captives are taken to Kufa, it is narrated that Kulthum called to the captives and said, "Woe unto you! With this 1,000 dirhams, keep the head of Hussein alayhi salam on top of the camel and behind us, the Sabaya, so that the people should be busy watching the head of Hussein instead of us." The narration says, the captor took the money and followed her instruction. But the next day when he went to look at the money, all of it had changed to stones. One side of the stone read, "And do not think that Allah is heedless of what the unjust do. He only respites them to a day on which the eyes shall be fixed open." Verse of Quran from chapter 14, verse 42. And on the other side, the coin said, "And they who act unjustly shall know what is the final place in which they are returned to." Chapter 26, verse 227. This is a narration that is found in Allama Majlisi's work of Bihar al-Anwar. Of course, it just gives you a glimpse of how she is mentioned in the books. To go deeper now into some of the events around the events of Kufa, when she arrives in Kufa, she is said to have made a sermon. And I'll read to you a couple of things that she is said to have said. One of them, for example, Lady Kulthum alayhi salam exclaims the following. This is a very famous set of narrations of hers, which is important for us to be able to narrate. "O people of Kufa, do you not have any sense of shame before Allah and His Messenger, such that you look and stare at the ladies of the household of the Prophet?" The reporter says, "I was returning to Kufa after performing the Hajj. Celebrations were taking place in the city, and the governor had declared it an official public holiday, meaning a day of Eid. Upon inquiring, I was told that the members of the family of an outlaw were being brought to Kufa from Kerbala. The palace was surrounded by soldiers, and the sounds of beatings of drums and trumpets could be heard from all directions. My sight fell on the severed head of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, raised on the tip of a spear, and I saw Imam al-Sajjad tied to an unsaddled camel. After this, I saw women being brought as captives. From amongst them was one shouting towards the onlooking crowd. I asked someone, who was this woman? And I was told that this was Kulthum, the daughter of Ali ibn Abi Talib." The narrator continues, saying, quote, "The captives were stationed in front of the door of Banu Khazima. At this moment, Lady Kulthum's glance fell on the head of her brother Imam al-Hussein. In a state of despair, she tore at her outer garments and she recited the following lines of poetry. What will you answer if the Prophet were to ask you about this moment? What have you done whilst you were the last nations of God to my progeny and to the household of Allah, a household of the Prophet of Allah after my death? From them are captives and others covered with their blood. This was not the recompense to which I directed you to after me." She's speaking on behalf of the Prophet here, sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. "This was not the reward, the recompense to which I directed you after my death. That after me you deal with my kin with such evil? Indeed, I fear that a curse will come upon you like the chastisement that has befallen upon the previous nations." This is one line of poetry that is related to Lady Kulthum. The penultimate line of poetry I will mention to you here is also from Kufa. It's a very long line of poetry. I will just mention some of the lines and then I'll just give you some ayat that the commentators suggest that Lady Kulthum alayhi salam is trying to give an ishara, an indication towards. Lady Kulthum alayhi salam is said to have given a sermon on the day in which she was taken to Kufa. Specifically, it said on the day in which they were taken to Kufa. She was behind the cover of a carrier on the camel. So you know sometimes that the camels had the covers on them, and she was behind that when she raised her voice and she called out with the following: "O people of Kufa, shame on you. What is wrong with you that you would discard Hussein alayhi salam? You murdered him and snatched away his property. You have taken his women as captives and you have tortured them. May you perish. May you despair. May you be taken to hell. Do you know what you have done? Do you know what crime you have committed? Do you know what weight you carry on your backs? Do you know which blood you have shed? Do you know which noble women you have afflicted? Do you know which ladies you have looted? Do you know what kind of wealth you have stolen? You have killed the best man after the Prophet. The kindness has been taken away from your hearts. Know that the party of Allah are the successful one and the party of Satan are the losers." Then she turned to speak in a poetic manner and she said the following: "You have murdered my brother. May your mothers despair. You will be compensated with hellfire. You have shed the blood, that which Allah has forbidden to be shed, that which the Quran has forbidden to be shed, then what the Prophet himself forbade to be shed. Now receive glad tidings that you will be in the hellfire and that tomorrow you will be in the worst of it. Be sure that you will be in the hellfire forever. For surely I will cry my whole life for my brother." Allahu Akbar. If this statement is true, this line of poetry is true, it's a very powerful line of poetry that is being said. And by the way, this line of poetry is an early source. It is from Ibn Tawus al-Lahuf, which again, many of the scholars will read from. She says, "I will cry my whole life for my brother. He was born as a righteous man after the Prophet. My tears are plenty, ever so heavy and flowing down on my cheeks. They will never dry." Obviously, we do not take Lady Kulthum alayhi salam as Hujjat, but as a high source. We understand in the history of Shi'i Islam and the whole movement of Kerbala what is being said by such a phenomenal statement. The narrator of this narration said, when the people of Kufa heard this, all of them began wailing loudly, and the women were pulling at their hair at what they heard, and they were calling out for the loss and the destruction to fall upon the Kufan people. The men wailed and tore at their beards. Nobody had seen more weeping people than on that day in which Kulthum spoke. Allahu Akbar. The last set of poetries I'm going to read to you from is the famous ones that we recite on the day of Arbaeen. On the day of Arbaeen, irrespective of whether it's 1 year or 40 days or it's a metaphoric number, what we do know is that Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam arrived back in the city of Medina at some time after their escape from captivity. And what we do know is that Lady Kulthum alayhi salam is said to have made a lamentation upon entering the city of Medina. And this is the very famous lines of poetry that we always hear about. It is narrated the following, and I quote: "The Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam returned from their time in captivity, and when they reached closer to Medina, the city of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Lady Kulthum began to cry loudly, and she extemporaneously recited the following lines of poetry. O city of our grandfather, do not accept us. We have come to you with deep sorrows and regrets. Ah, inform the messenger of Allah about us, that the great calamity has befallen us after our father, and that our men, they are all dead, left in Kerbala without their heads, and that all the children were slaughtered. And inform our grandfather that we were captured and were robbed of everything, that your people were sacrificed, left bare in Kerbala, and were persecuted. And they slaughtered Hussein without consideration of your status towards us. If only you could have seen the captives on the backs of the camels. O Messenger, after all of these hardships, the eyes of the people stared at us. And if you could have only understood what we saw and how the enemies tortured us. O Fatima, at this point, she addresses her mother, salamullahi alayha. O Fatima, if only you could have seen your daughters as captives, you would have seen us scattered. If only you could have seen your followers and you could have seen Sajjad Zainul Abidin. If only you could have seen us at night, and from being awake all night, we became blind. What you have seen befall us from your enemies is not even a share of what has truly happened to us. Allahu Akbar, what lines of poetry. If your life would have continued, you would have mourned us until the day of judgment. So go, ascend upon Al-Baqi' and stand and announce, O son of the beloved of our world, and say, O uncle, O my dear Hassan the pure, the children of your brother, they have been sacrificed and they have vanquished us. O uncle, surely your brother most certainly sacrificed well away and distanced from you, O Al-Hassan. And he was left without a head and circled by the wild birds and the beasts that were frightening us. If only you could have seen, O master, they took the women and we could not find anyone to help us. We were on top of camels without a cover, and you would have found your family members bare. O city of our grandfather, do not accept us. With sorrows and grief we came. We left you, O Medina, with all of our family members together, but we have returned to you without our men and without our sons. We get a picture here of Sayyidah Kulthum alayhi salam, her achievements, the legacy that she has left behind, the monumental shaping of history that occurs through her poetry, and then ultimately all of what we do returns back to her. Even this discussion and the poetry that we have been reciting before the majlis and after the majlis is in honor of her example. I will conclude with one line of Maqtal that is narrated from Lady Kulthum alayhi salam, that is attributed to her qawl. It is said that after the beheading of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, the attack on the tents began. She narrates a following incident. It is said that the daughter of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam by the name of Fatima, one of the daughters named Fatima, she states that I stood outside the tent on the evening of the 10th, the 11th of Muharram, and I witnessed the first attack that was taking place upon us. A rider on his horse began to ride towards us, and I, in my desperation to flee, I ran in any direction in which I could to avoid the oncoming attack. Imagine when a granddaughter of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, I just fled in any direction in which I could flee. She narrates, she says that as the man chased me down, he took the flat side of the spearhead and he struck it against my back so hard that when I fell unconscious. When I awoke in the lap of my auntie, Sayyidah Kulthum alayhi salam. I looked at her and I said, Oh auntie, what has happened? Oh auntie, they have snatched my veil from me. I do not have a veil. Is there any covering that you can give to me in replacement? Lady Kulthum alayhi salam is said to have responded. She said, Oh my child Fatima, even your auntie's veil has been snatched from her today. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the appearance of Imam Al-Mahdi alayhi salam, to allow us to be alongside him at all times in our life and in our death. If we are to pass away from this world before his coming, Ya Allah, raise us from our grave so that we can partake in the victories of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. Ya Allah, help us to be able to understand the legacy of Sayyidah Kulthum alayhi salam better and to live it for ourselves in our way of the movement of Kerbala, and help us inshaAllah to perform her ziyarah fi dunya wal akhirah and to grant us her intercession fi dunya wal akhirah. Wassalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Matima Hussein, Ya Hussein.
صلوات على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Spirit of Hussein, guide us through your way in every trial we face to reach God in your way. Oh, lonely hearts broken by the pain. Oh, every tear calls out Hussein's name. Every single tear reminds us of Hussein's name. Every tortured face holds a sacred place. Every tortured face holds a sacred place. Spirit of Hussein, guide us through your way in every trial we face to reach God in your way. O tearful ones, can you see the babe? Can you see his smile? Witness for a while. Can you see your sons born unto your wives? Can you hear their cries? See tears in their eyes? Can you imagine then never seeing them again? This was our Hussein, Ali Asghar was his pain. This was our Hussein, Ali Asghar was his pain. Spirit of Hussein, guide us through your way in every trial we face to reach God in your way. Oh, our sweet Abbas, where are your sacred hands? Where are your shining arms, plundered upon the sands? Where is your valiant heart? Where is your sword so sharp to quench the thirst of the pure? Courageous you surely were, to quench the thirst of the pure. Courageous you surely were. Spirit of Hussein, guide us through your way in every trial we face to reach God in your way. O daughter of Haydar, your sweetheart bears the scars. O beloved of Batul, you felt their hate so cruel. O sisters in Islam, imagine yourselves in Sham. Imagine the pain and hurt displayed for the cursed hurt. From the gaze of man your God, though the way is always hard. You're the heirs of sweet Zainab, to safeguard our hijab. with years of sweet Zainab to safeguard our hijab. Spirit of Hussein, guide us through your way. In every trial we face, to reach God in your way. Salawat ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad.
Thank you very much for that recitation, and thank you, Jaffer, for that talk. We're now going to have a short Q&A before, after which we will have the ziyarah. So, Shaykh Jaffer?
Assalamu alaikum.
Okay, just it's worth asking a couple of questions which have come through. Most of them have been coming through directly to me, which I'll read out.
Sure. I'll do my best. If I can't answer them, then I'll try to get back to whoever is asking the questions.
Okay. The first question is, what's the significance of the number 40, 40th, Arbaeen, Chalismo, for mourning? Why do we have this 40? Can you please comment on it?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We have a historical understanding, and then we also have a spiritual understanding. From the historical understanding, the practice of mourning a martyred individual for 40 days appears to have been something that was an Arab practice even prior to the advent of Islam. And what we appear to see from the kind of the hadith corpus is that even mourning ceremonies took place for the shuhada of the battles of Badr and Uhud, such that it would last 40 days, which tells us that this was something that was considered to be a normative practice amongst the Arabs, which means that if this is the case, then there is nothing religious per se about the number 40. From this particular angle, it is something that the culture of the Arabs were doing in order to keep alive, to commemorate the heroism of their slain and of their fallen soldiers. Of course, when Islam then came in and the Muslims began to adopt that, then this is something then that was verified as an allowable tradition by the faith itself. If we understand it from the spiritual perspective, there are a number of narrations, or even the ayat, indicate towards the number 40. For example, we see the time that Musa alayhi salam spent away from Banu Israel, 30 plus 10 days, a total of 40 days before he was to receive Torah. That tells us that there is something spiritual about the number 40. And if you actually look at some of the scholars, what they say is that the number 40 has a spiritual element to it like other numbers do as well. That certain a'mal are supposed to be performed for 40 days in order to get the benefit and the blessings out of it. That makes sense from one perspective, because we know that it is better for us to be able to practice an act ongoing than it is to do an act just once. Even if a person was to perform Salat al-Layl, they will of course be benefit in doing it once. But for the person who manages to do an act for 40 days, it is something that is said to have yielded the best of practices. It is an evidence that that person has become committed to that action. And therefore, mourning for 40 days of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam gives us a period of ensuring that the spirit is enlivened with the story of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam for an ongoing period. So to my limited knowledge, these are the reasons as to why the number 40 has some significance.
Thank you very much. One of the questions on YouTube. So anyone who's on YouTube, please feel free to drop a question on the chat if you'd like over there, or message directly. I'm just reading out as it stands. It says, were there no other children of Imam Hassan not left other than Imam Zain al-Abidin that Kulthum managed to save? I think he means Imam Hussein, but yes. Were there any other children that Kulthum managed to save, and if not, why not?
So what we know is that at the time of the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, there seems to be a number of different children that are around the story. Of course, we would know of the son of Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam, whose arm was severed, and then according to the famous maqatil, that he shot in the chest or in the stomach with an arrow. So this is one. Of course, we have Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam's presence, but probably way too young to be able to go out and fight, maybe 3 or 4 years old at the time or something of that equivalent. And so it doesn't appear that any of the other sons or younger sons of the two imams were either in a position to offer themselves or did offer themselves for whatever reason. And so the famous attribution of this event is solely about Imam as-Sajjad alayhi salam, and there appears to be no other son of one of the two imams that survived that offered themselves to be able to go into the battlefield, such that either Lady Zainab al-Kubra or Zainab al-Sughra had to be able to stop in order to save the lineage of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. So no.
Thank you very much. Another question has come from Ahmad Darsi. You said that very few Shia scholars accept that Kulthum married Umar al-Khattab. However, Pro-Ali al-Yaqubi mentions that the marriage mentions about that marriage. Also, Al-Kulayni's Furu al-Kafi, Al-Murtada, and Tanzih al-Anbiya. In addition, not only does Al-Kulayni mention the marriage, but he also writes that after Umar's death, Imam Ali alayhi salam is reported to have taken her back to his house. What's your view?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So I didn't say that, or maybe if I did say it, then I apologize. What I said was, or what I think I said was, that in regards to her existence, there appears to be more doubt about her existence than there appears to be about her existence. Then there appears to be more doubt about her existence in the majority. In regards to the marriage, this is a lengthy debate that the scholars go to. And because it is mentioned in such prominent books like Al-Kafi, this is why so many scholars have gone through this particular debate. Now, in regards to the issue of Al-Kafi, it mentions that it is Kulthum, daughter of Imam Ali alayhi salam. But it doesn't suggest that it's the daughter of Lady Fatima alayhi salam, which means that we would need to look at understanding which daughter it is. And this is when other texts and other sources come into it, and there appears to be a plethora of sources that talk about that Salama was the wife of Abu Bakr. They had a daughter by the name of Kulthum. There is a wasiyah from Abu Bakr to marry his daughter off to Umar ibn al-Khattab. When he dies, Abu Bakr's wife marries Imam Ali alayhi salam, and they have 2 children that they are looking after. The first is Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr, the famous companion of Imam Ali alayhi salam that ended up becoming the governor of Egypt. And as you know, he was martyred there as well. And the second child is Kulthum. So the other opinion is that actually it is this daughter that is being spoken about. And there are many, many reasons for it. And of course, if we accept that there was an attack by Umar ibn al-Khattab on the house of Lady Fatima alayhi salam in some form, whether the details are speculative or agreed upon is a secondary issue. We're not going into that. If we're in agreement that there was some attack on the house of Lady Fatima alayhi salam, it appears difficult for us to be able to rationalize that Imam Ali alayhi salam would give his daughter, or the daughter of Fatima alayhi salam, in marriage to Umar ibn al-Khattab. This is where the debate becomes even deeper and even more problematic in history. Because what happens in the narrations, it says, and again, forgive me for having to be so graphic about this, it says that this is a faraj that was stolen from us. Maybe I should say it, that this was a lady whose honor was taken from us by Umar ibn al-Khattab. The narrations say that Umar forced Imam Ali alayhi salam to give his daughter to Umar ibn al-Khattab, and that she was a very young child, so young that we would consider it to be hugely problematic, and that he grabbed physically Kulthum and snatched her and forced Imam Ali alayhi salam to give her in marriage. If we take all of these narrations together as a jigsaw puzzle, rather than just the ones in Al-Kafi, it would become very difficult for us to understand that this is the daughter of Fatima alayhi salam, and that this would have been allowed by Imam Ali alayhi salam. There is no way Imam would have allowed his daughter to have been groped, and there is no way that he would have allowed his daughter to be married off to the killer of his wife. And so all of these things become very problematic, and this is why it's become such a detailed discussion. Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Milani actually has an entire book dedicated to the study of all of these narrations. And what I did in my study, in my book, The Hidden Treasure, was go through all of these different narrations, these different debates, and I humbly came to the opinion that it was not Kulthum, the daughter of Fatima alayhi salam, it is Kulthum, the daughter of Abu Bakr, that was married to Umar. And as you mentioned in the earlier comment, that after Umar died, then this daughter was returned back to the house of Imam Ali alayhi salam. If you wish, please feel free to purchase the book, and a detailed discourse on this topic is available in the book, The Hidden Treasure. Wish, please feel free to purchase the book.
Thank you very much.
A detailed discourse on this topic is available in the book, The Hidden Treasure.
Thank you. Another question on YouTube is, did Kulthum have any children, and where is she buried?
Very nice question. According to my humble research, she might have been married, but there doesn't appear to have been any evidence of children. If this is the case, then it would suggest that when she returned back to Medina, then she would have returned back to Medina to her husband. Whether he died before the event is unknown. In regards to her death, the last set of narrations that we have for her is the set of narrations upon her return to Medina. The debate around Zainab al-Kubra is whether she had to go to Egypt or whether she returned to Damascus, either, according to some scholars, because she was forced to go back to Damascus because the Caliph had to stop her from speaking and organizing in Medina against Banu Umayyah, or maybe she went to Egypt because it was a stronghold of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam at that time. And of course, you know the debate as to whether she died in Egypt or Damascus. There is no such narration about Lady Kulthum that she ever leaves Medina after having returned back from captivity, which tells us, or at least all we can go off based on trying to reconstruct her life and death, is that she died in the city of Medina. Her position as a family member would have almost certainly guaranteed that she would have been buried in Jannatul Baqi. So again, if we assume she existed, if we assume that she died in Medina, the likelihood is that she is buried in Jannatul Baqi, though we do not have any grave for her.
Thank you very much. Another question on the YouTube channel, on the chat. Assalamu alaikum. I assume this is related to the question earlier about the number 40. I would suggest, as per our research and talks and your previous lecture, that the Arbaeen commemoration is that the return of the caravan was exactly 40 days after Ashura, and hence that's when the actual commemoration took place.
The question of why we commemorate Arbaeen as in the number 40 is different to the question of whether the captives arrived back after 40 days. So I wasn't answering the second question, I was answering the first question, which was, or at least my humble understanding was, why the significance of the number 40. In terms of the second question of the return of the captives in 40 days, as you know that there are a number of different opinions, that it is exactly 40 days, it is around 40 days, it is 1 year and 40 days, or maybe it is more than 1 year. And each scholarly line of thinking will have their own evidence as to why that may be the case. In my humble opinion, it is very possible and maybe even probable that the Sabaya returned to Kerbala in around 40 days. And the reason for this is because there is historical evidence to discuss both A, the route that the captives took, and B, the pace in which caravans traveled across desert plains. And we have this from a number of different sources that speak about how long it took people to take on the journey for Hajj from Medina to Mecca, from one location to another. And so we get an understanding of the amount of time it would have taken for them to have gone. Now, if you know the geography in your mind, or even if you want to put it up on Google Maps or a Google image or whatever, the geography of the captives was that Kerbala in Iraq, they then are taken in a horseshoe shape, taken towards the northern area, taken through Kufa, taken towards the northern parts, which would be on the borders of Lebanon, and then taken down. Maybe Haleb was the most northerly point in which they reached, and then taken down along that coastal side towards Damascus. So we have an idea of how long it took them. And then if we imagine in Damascus, they may have spent several days in Damascus in the jails. If we make a theological assumption that the sermons of Lady Zainab alayhi salam, Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, were so powerful that they caused a genuine tumult and forced Yazid to have to free the Sabaya, the captives, if we make these theological assumptions, then the route that the captives would have taken back is not, of course, across the horseshoe. They would have taken the route directly across. And if you're looking at the map, you'll see it for yourself, directly across from Damascus back to Kerbala. In my humble opinion, it is possible for all of that to have taken place within 40 days. Number two, if we accept that the sermons were so powerful enough to be able to gain the freedom, then again, it is possible to have done so within the 40 days. It doesn't make sense to me personally that we say that these sermons were so powerful that they were able to shake the people of Damascus to some level of awareness of the crimes that they had committed, for the Sabaya to have then stayed inside the prisons for a whole year. You can't say both are true, that this was such a powerful sermon that it awakened the people of Damascus, and yet the people of Damascus did nothing to aid in their freedom. If we accept that their sermons were so powerful, then surely it made an immediate impact. And this is why they were able to return back within 40 days. And this is something that I write in some detail in the book, The Hidden Treasure, as well.
Thank you very much. I know we've kind of run out of time, but I'll ask one final question and then we'll wrap up. Can you tell me why Alims do not speak much more about the life of Imam Hussein alayhi salam before Kerbala? And are there any books of Imam Hussein alayhi salam of his life before Kerbala?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think there has been a concerted effort to make change in this area, or at least I have seen more people try to delve into how Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam supported Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam. I have seen some works being done on, trying to understand the political movement of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam in the years up until the attempt to force bay'ah upon him by Yazid bin Muawiyah. And I'm also seeing more works being done to try to really look through the sermons of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam prior to the events of Kerbala as well. I think this is a really positive movement, and I do believe it's about research. I do believe that some of our scholars are taking these topics much more seriously, And for their own selves, they want to understand the movement of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam beyond kind of just the battle scenarios that were occurring. There are some good books that are available. There is one book which is it's actually a quote, it's actually the quotations of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam's servants. You can find this available if you Google it, all the sermons of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, the speeches of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. I would highly recommend that text. Also, you get large biographical accounts. So, for example, there is the work by Allama Baqir Qarashi, The Life of Imam al-Hussein, Hayat al-Hussein, or Hayat Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, translated into English. This is a large volume that would provide you a nice biographical account of Imam. And I also think that scholars like Shaykh Kerbala, who are doing they're writing volumes. I mean, it's into the hundreds of volumes. An encyclopedia, a mawsu'a on Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Sadly, as far as I'm aware, this is not yet translated into English, and this work needs to be done. But I think if you try to look at some of these sources, you will find a lot more work available to kind of fulfill that desire that you have to get to know Imam beyond just kind of narrowing him to the events of Kerbala.
Thank you very much, Sheikh. Thank you for blessing us with your presence and honoring us with your presence today. And inshallah, we will be able to welcome you again in a future date, inshallah.
Inshallah. Stay safe, all of you at home, and pray that we all get to meet each other soon, inshallah.
I mean, inshallah. Just a couple of quick announcements before we finish with Ziyara. This Friday, we have a talk by Amna Jatoy. She'll be speaking about In the Court of the People, Pakistan's election. The week after, we have Ayatollah Sayyid Fadl Milani, who'll be speaking about Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's wafat. And the week after, we have Zahra al-Rikabi, who'll be speaking to us about COVID-19 and the legal implications of it. Thank you very much, and we'll end the program with Salawat ala Muhammad wa al Muhammad, followed by Ziyarat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa al Muhammad.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد السلام عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي يا نبي الله السلام عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي يا محمد بن عبد الله ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك يا رسول الله وعلى ابن عمك أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب وصي رسول رب العالمين السلام عليك يا رسول الله وعلى بضعتك الصديقة الطاهرة فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين السلام عليك يا رسول الله وعلى زوجتك الوفية الغراء خديجة الكبرى أم المؤمنين السلام عليك يا رسول الله وعلى ولديك الإمامين الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة السلام عليك يا رسول الله وعلى أئمة المسلمين من ذرية ولدك الحسين علي السجاد ومحمد الباقر وجعفر الصادق وموسى الكاظم وعلي الرضا ومحمد الجواد وعلي الهادي والحسن العسكري والحجة بن الحسن المهدي السلام عليك يا صاحب الزمان عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله مخرجك وظهورك وجعلنا الله من أنصارك وأعوانك والمستشهدين بين يديك السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.